Welcome to the Growth and Resilience Network, where every episode brings you targeted stories and strategies about professional and personal growth and resilience. Hi, I'm Steve Piscitelli, your host, coming to you from my headquarters, my world headquarters here in Atlantic Beach, Florida. Today's podcast marks the third anniversary of the Growth and Resilience Network podcast channel. Now, over the past few months, I've gone back and listened to previous episodes from the past year. And while each episode stands on its own, I find it intriguing that there were similar themes that popped up again and again. This past year, I found my conversation partners coming back to four themes. One examined how to know and be true to yourself. A second one was the power of relationships to nurture hope and resilience. The third that I heard coming up with my various guests was paying attention to weak signals coming to us from the future. And a fourth one that kind of crept in here and there was the importance of empathy. Now, I've pulled a takeaway gem or two from each of the third year's podcasts and offer you this time capsule of my guests and their wisdom during our conversations. Now, I encourage you to dig deeper and listen to each podcast conversation in their entirety. You can find them on my website, stevepiscitelli.com. Just click on the Media Broadcast tab and then follow the podcast link. My goal has always been to provide you with upbeat and positive episodes with everyday people who share their stories about growth and resilience and how they make a difference in their respective communities. So as always, I thank you for listening and sharing these podcasts, and especially this third anniversary podcast with your friends, families, and colleagues. Let's start this anniversary episode with insights from a singer-songwriter, Mr. Mike Shackleford. He shared the conversation, one podcast episode, with concert presenter Ray Lewis, and they talked about the importance of supporting local music. And Shaq took a bit of a deeper dive toward the end of that podcast episode, telling us about the importance to own our own work, put our own stamp on it. And to do that, you have to know what you do, why you do it, and who you are. And then in another episode, I had the opportunity to sit down and learn from Shannon Burbridge, Carol Cullen, and Christie Loesch as they explained how pole dancing provides more than powerful physical fitness workouts. It also touches on so many aspects and dimensions of life. So listen to them speak about pole dancing and its connection to confidence, awareness, empowerment, what they called feminine energy.
Mine and Kent's ironclad rule, we would go from cover to original seamlessly. Because I still teach that to people that I talk to now about this kind of thing. I spoke to a guy in Nashville just the other day, and I said, if you want what you want is, if you cover something, you want to cover a song the same way you would cover your own original. Make them to where you own it. You write your original song, you play it the way you want to play it, you put your style to it, and when you cover another artist, approach it the same way and make that song your own, so that people, of course they know it was written by the Rolling Stones, but the thread, the feel, is the same kind of feel that you give your own flavor to your own original, so therefore you're stamping your original, you're owning that cover, just like you own your original material.
I remember sitting in Gary Smalley's living room with you and Gary, and you were talking that same thing. You know, it's where somebody would say, well, you did a Stone song, for instance, but it didn't sound like them. And it's got to sound like you.
Yeah,
it's their song.
If I gave Mick and Keith one of my songs, I guarantee you they would do what they wanted. If they chose to record it, they would do what they wanted to. They wouldn't say, what do you think we should do?
Feminine energy. It's come up a couple of times. Explain. What is feminine energy? How would you describe it? Is it
something?
Is it confidence? Is it a fitness, emotional fitness? what is feminine energy?
Spiritual and emotional.
Spiritual and emotional.
Spiritual and emotional. And it is something that, Carol, you can jump in a minute. It is definitely something that I felt like I did not have permission to express most of my life, if not all of my life, until I began to practice pole.
Is that something that we're seeing beside, I don't know if it's beside the pole, in addition to the pole, when we hear things like the Me Too movement? Is this a part of a larger movement, if you would?
I believe so. Yeah, I think women are tired of it. Go ahead.
I would say, too, my thoughts about feminine energy are the sensuality, the moving of your hips, the tossing of your head back, the neck rolls, and the sassiness. And you could even say that for men, it's a sensual energy, too. So when a man does a pole, I mean, I don't know what they feel, but there is something about the movement, the options to have these movements, and the permission in the class to move like this. If you go to a regular aerobics class, it's not typical. So if you go to a Latin dancing class, you're going to find that there. So there is something about the moving of the hips, just that sensual energy to me, and it's just another aspect of being human, right? That is suppressed often.
You mentioned men. Are there men involved in pole dancing?
Absolutely.
Are your classes gender specific?
They're co-ed.
They are co-ed. Mm-hmm. Okay. And so men come in as well?
Yes.
All right. Christie, did you want to chime in on this idea of feminine energy, if there was anything additional?
Yeah, I think that for me it's just a sense of freedom. When I walk in that studio, I can put on my pretty pole outfit and just be free to move my body. I sit at a desk on a computer all day. So this is my time to just be free and move. And I feel very, very empowered, strong. It's just an energy. It's hard to describe. It really is.
Yeah.
But you feel it inside. Yes.
Another concept that's arisen time and again over the 3 years of the Growth and Resilience Network podcast has been the importance of relationships. And think about it, really. Without authentic relationships, what do we have? They're the building block for connections, for conversation, for collaboration, inspiration, motivation, and resilience. So these following 3 clips share insights about the connection of relationships and resilience. Now, first, we're going to hear from artist Gary Mack as he discusses art as a unifying force in both developing and sustaining community. Then, we're fortunate to hear from 4 participants in the Brooks Adaptive Sports Program in Jacksonville, Florida. Matt, Sarah, Don, and Chris are going to tell us how sports, for them, their sports lives, and their challenges, how sports is more than physical fitness and athleticism. At its core, sports is the catalyst for connecting with, reconnecting with, in many cases, social networks. And finally, in this segment, university student Elijah Armstrong, who was involved in an educational accommodations lawsuit while he was in high school, shares how teachers created an important support network for him during a challenging time in his life. Let's give a listen. What does that do, from your perspective, what does that do for the community when they get to go out and see this art? Not in a museum, it's on their streets, the ones that they walk, ride their bikes,
right,
drive their cars, walk their dogs. What does it do for the community?
It draws them closer together. I used to do the art walk, and I might still like to pick it back up. Right up here in our little corner of the world at the corner.
Yeah.
I had a great spot, and I found that there were people that would come out every month, rain or shine, just because they loved the art walk. They loved to see who had produced what. And they also enjoy knowing or having gotten to know artists Sure. I mean, you walk by and have to say hi, and it's nice to see you. And for the artists, it's a great way to stay connected to the community and let people know what you have. Make money if you through sales, hopefully.
Sure. You
Some-
do have to eat.
Yes, we do. But it's just nice to see a lot of the same people show up.
Yeah.
It demonstrates that people do have an interest in the arts, and that's a nice way for everybody to stay connected.
The
as I
word
said,
I was thinking, connections.
Yeah,
Yes.
and people need that. Art in public places, murals I hear are on the upswing downtown. That's a great thing.
Yeah. To me, it does, especially with Chris having an entire life behind you, and then 4 years ago, things dramatically change. What do you think helped your resilience? How did you bounce back? How did you keep the faith? How did you keep going?
Honestly, I mean, I always put this to my brother Nicholas. I always put it down to that, to watching what because his accident happened, he was 17, 17 years old, car accident, broke his neck. Daddy didn't teach us to drive very well. So basically, so this is 1995. I was stationed in Maryland. He was 17 years old. We didn't know what was going to happen. And this was the first time that our family had any introduction to paralysis, disability, wheelchairs, anything like that. So we didn't know, was he going to live on his own? When I built my house in 97, I made it semi-accessible, which, flash forward 20 years, I'm glad I did, because now I'm living in it. And it's not as accessible as I thought it was back then. Anyway, so for me, it was watching him go on with his life. He never was angry, bitter, upset. I mean, the first thing he said coming out of recovery was, "I need to do something. I want to race," because he was a gymnast. He's like, "I want to get into racing." So he got into racing. He did racing for a year, and then he found rugby. And once he found rugby, that was it. So, I mean, so basically for me, my recovery was aided by watching my brother's recovery for so many years, if that makes any sense.
Yes, and it sounds like sports was a major part of all of your lives. Don?
If I may, the sports aspect to the program is integral, but the social impact of it is also, I think, a pinnacle of the program. After being gone from sports for so long, when I came back to it, what I found was a social network that allowed me to re-examine where I was in my life with my disability, having been away from new technologies, new treatments, new philosophies for so long. And that was one thing that was pretty amazing to me to realize was, here I've been in a chair for 30 years and doing things the way that I had learned them and the way I did things. And then I get around a bunch of 20-year-old guys playing wheelchair rugby or surfing or playing or shooting archery or whatever. And there's all this conversation about different stuff. And I was just kind of wowed by all that. So, and bringing people out of the darkness, if you will, who have been sitting with a disability for all their life and never had the opportunity to get out. We've been very fortunate in our experiences that our families were there for us, that they brought us out. That's not everyone's experience. There are more experiences where, like Sarah's and to a degree mine, where the parents were told they will have nothing. They will be nothing. Give them away, put them somewhere where they can just live out whatever life they're going to have and pass on. And that was true for myself in 1978 and Sarah's experience. And there are people who are still living that life. So our challenge is to get into the community, find those people, bring them out of that horrible existence and say, you can do anything. And I can prove to you can, because I can find somebody in this program that has exactly the same limitations as you do. Perceived limitations. So.
Well, it's, as I'm listening to you, what would it be?
I think the main point in things I've experienced throughout my life, I think the main point that needs to be said is we are the same. There there's only one difference, and that's what we're sitting in. But that does not make us who we are. That doesn't define our abilities, our personalities, our strengths, our weaknesses. Everybody has those. And the chairs, the injuries, whatever your physical challenges, that doesn't matter in the community. And I think that's a good message for anybody, anywhere, is that if we could all realize that we are still on an equal playing field and we still have as much to offer as anybody else does in this world, that would help bring a better understanding and more compassion to society.
I definitely agree with what Matt and Dawn said, and I would also emphasize the point of educate yourself. Ask somebody questions. Don't just sit there and stare at us or tell your children. Don't look at them. It's like kids look because they're curious and they want to know what's going on. So have your kid ask me, why are you in the wheelchair? I have no problem explaining it to a kid. I have no problem explaining it to an adult. So it's better to be educated, because once they're educated about it, they realize there's nothing really in our way of doing what we want.
Through this and attempting to get the accommodations, am I correct that there were some folks at Stanton who were attempting to advocate for you?
Yes, I can say that I can't think off the top of my head of a single teacher I had that was not very, very pro Elijah. Every single teacher I had was very helpful in being incredibly accommodating and understanding what my circumstances were, regardless of how very difficult it was for me. All of the teachers that I had were absolutely amazing.
And that had to be powerful for you.
It was great. And I remember hearing from, because I'm still very close with my band director, because I was in the band, the Blue Devil band, for 4 years, saying all the time, him saying that he was talking to the teachers, and the teachers were very, very positive about me, and that they didn't have a doubt that I could do the work. So that was very helpful.
How often do we get lulled into doing what are known as best practices? We do something because it's worked in the past. It was great. It really helped move us or a project or a team forward. So our thinking goes that if it worked then, it should continue to work. And what happens is sometimes we get mired in history rather than being future focused. And what we may miss are those weak signals that are coming to us from the future, or at least giving us some signs about what might be coming. So this segment looks at the theme of paying attention to weak signals. Our February 2018 episode featured two attorneys, Camille Wilson and Fernando Dutra, who actually helped me navigate the corridors of the United States Patent and Trademark Office to obtain my registered trademark for the Growth and Resilience Network. And in their brief clip, they look at the nature and expectations of the client-attorney relationship, and they share some insights about how they see that relationship transforming as we move into the future. And then I had an opportunity to sit down and record a podcast with a former educator and current director of development for a group home facility. That would be one Mark Johnson. And, you're going to hear us address thoughts about weak signals for public education. So sit back and let's take a listen. There's a stereotype of the starving creative artist. And then there's the stereotype, which you were just alluding to, of that attorney who will charge you $15 a minute to answer an email or more.
I've never heard that happen.
I'll show you one. Not from you two. That's for sure. That never happened. How do you reconcile those two stereotypes? How have you, Wilson-Dutra, done that? Because I think a lot of folks that I know that are musicians, it's one, they just don't do it for whatever reason. It could be inertia. It could be, it's too expensive. I don't need to do that. I mailed it to myself. Whatever the excuse or the reason. And some of it is, I just don't have that money. So is there a way to reconcile that, or what? I mean, because you were going toward the stereotype.
So there are a few things. I think going back to that beginning conversation about the changing tide of law practice, I think more and more as the years go on, lawyers see that clients aren't reacting well to the hourly rates, right? Minute rates.
A bill for 6 minutes.
So for us, we kind of frame the firm around that sort of quandary that we saw popping up, in that we just do flat fees. You know exactly how much it'll cost before we do it, and we go from there.
And that was wonderful. Speaking personally,
and since
there were
we
no surprises,
right?
No surprises.
And since we work with startups for the most part, we know they're on a set budget. We know that they need to plan. They have every intention of doing something. We want to facilitate that. We want to make that as easy as possible.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And then to the second point, word of mouth. So the starving artist might not approach someone like us because they have that perception for a law office. But if you talk to someone or a referring attorney that they already have a relationship with, which was your case.
And hopefully a podcast like this gets that message out to folks. I mean, that's the hope.
But the most important thing in that situation is finding someone that you would like to work with.
Sure.
Right? So the starving artists, it's just a matter of time for them to find an attorney that they actually like to work with.
Relationship.
Right.
And for intellectual property, almost all types, it's a long-term relationship.
Yeah.
And we always recommend, if you don't feel comfortable with us, you want to speak to other attorneys, please do, because this is going to be, years and years of communication. And if you don't feel like you can communicate with your attorney, then.
So the last question or comment I have, Steve, is this. It strikes me how often you come back to relationships. And it seems like, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, the Growth and Resilience Network really is about, at the heart or at the core, the relationship between mentor and mentee, teacher and student, trainer and trainee, consultant and the person being, educated. Does that, if that's true, if I've characterized it correctly, that it's about relationships, that would seem to have some optimistic element to it in terms of the future, because if we train and hire and educate talented people who can develop these relationships with a new age of students,
and
seems to me like education, like any other institution, can move forward.
Oh, I definitely think so. I have people sometimes say, "Well, how can you be so hopeful?" Well, hope is really it's a combination of expectation and desire, and we might at times not expect the best. The desire part, though, is I don't want to ever give up on the desire that it can be better. Yeah, it definitely can be better. In our final segment, well, we talk about relationships, we talk about connections with others, and this particular segment takes a look at the idea, the concept of empathy. Now, once again, Mark Johnson and I are going to share some insights that'll touch on that. But I think even more importantly, and what a better way to wrap up this anniversary edition than with 4 educational leaders. Actually, they're 4 student leaders. And, well, really, they're 4 5th grade leaders from the Atlantic Beach Elementary School right here in Atlantic Beach, Florida. And I posed the question to these 4 young scholars, what would be one thing you would like adults to know about 5th graders? Oh my. You do not want to miss their insights. Sit back and listen and enjoy.
Well, that begs this question. What is education going to look like in 2028?
Golly. And that's a phenomenal question that I wish we ended before you asked that question.
Always the slippery one, huh?
Yeah, you're the slippery one. I think one of the things that, and it sounds like it shouldn't be futuristic, but we've lost touch with it. I used to teach, and teachers all over the country teach this, something called information literacy. How you evaluate sources, okay? How you use sources, where you find sources. All right, basic stuff. And over the last couple of years, it's pretty obvious that that's not so obvious anymore. That people aren't doing that. And I think we're going forward, we got to go backward in that very basic case of information literacy. I think also in the area of critical thinking. See, and these are the things that, I don't know, I guess you can give scenarios and test the scenarios or something, how somebody would solve something, but it's not a multiple choice answer. We need to be teaching that. Go to these 7 R's I mentioned. That, to me, is the future. What are we doing so that people can relate to one another? If we're always stuck to our digital devices, what's happening to our empathy, our capacity to empathize? Do young kids even know how to empathize? Do they know what it is? Not just the word, but the concept. That comes from relationships, but that comes from seeing somebody's eyeballs when you've insulted them and you see the impact that has. You can't see that on a screen. So how do we deal with that? I think that has to be part of it. The resources are constantly changing. So how are we constantly changing with that? I think it's disingenuous to tell teachers, you go get the continuing education, you go buy the resources. No, these are things that the system is going to need to provide. You take a look at the reflection. We gotta teach people how to sit back and just breathe, which ties into the resilience. Because we talk about resilience, and some people, that's a soft skill. Well, I think soft skills are maybe even more important than hard skills.
Things have changed.
Things have
from
changed.
The olden days.
Charlotte, what are the olden days to you? Is that like 3rd grade?
No, the olden days to me is when my parents were little.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, that you want the okay. That's an interesting. From a 5th grader's perspective, you'd like the adults to know things aren't quite the same as they were when you were a 5th grader.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like we don't wear. We like different things.
We like different things.
Times have changed, people.
Okay.
We are going through changes, and we can be stubborn people. Very stubborn people.
Definitely.
As 5th graders, you can be very stubborn people.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Including yourself?
I am very stubborn, yes.
that it can be really hard.
Being
and
a 5th grader.
And like maybe our parents don't remember what it's like to have to do all the hard work.
The hard work of being a 5th grader. And?
That we might need more help on the 5th grade homework than we did in the 4th and 5th.
A little more help on homework, please. That could help us. All right. So there you have it, the hits from year 3 of the Growth and Resilience Network podcast channel. As always, thank you for being loyal listeners. Without you, there is no Growth and Resilience Network. I thank you for sharing the podcast with family, friends, colleagues, and community leaders. If you have a few moments, please consider posting a review on iTunes or the Libsyn channel, or even send a shout out to me at my email address. You can find those links and contacts on my website, stevepiscitelli.com, where you'll also find information about upcoming conversations as well as past conversations over the past 3 years, and other programs and resources for your personal growth and resilience. So, folks, until we meet, either virtually or somewhere in person around this great nation, this is Steve Piscitelli from my world headquarters here in Atlantic Beach, Florida, reminding all of us to choose well, live well, and be well. and continue to make, share, and savor those powerful moments. Bye-bye, folks.